It's from Shabbos Parshas Shoftim, Daled Elul, Tavshin Chaf Zayin. It's going to elaborate actually on some of the things that we spoke about in the Maimer we just finished from the Dvar Malchus. So it's really like mashlim each other and what we had and we even mentioned yesterday during the shir. Shoftim v'shoitrim titin l'cha b'chol שעריך, that judges and officers you should place in all your gates. Hine parsha shoftim chol al pirov b'chodesh Elul, the parsha shoftim generally falls during the month of El. The parsha Re'eh, when it comes to parsha Re'eh, last week's parsha, sometimes it comes out on Shabbos Mevorchim El, the Shabbos preceding. Sometimes Shabbos Parshas Re'eh coincides actually during that Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh El. Nimtza comes out, Parsha Shoftim mitamid b'tochim El. Therefore, Shoftim always comes out in the month of El because it's following Re'eh, and Re'eh is either Shabbos Mevorchim or Rosh Chodesh. Therefore, since Parsha Shoftim is always in the month of El, therefore we're forced to say that there's some type of connection between Parsha Shoftim and El. Like it's known what the Shallah wrote. The whole Parsha Yeshal Shaychis and every Parsha has a connection and association with the week that it falls in. Especially according to the saying of the Alter Rebbe that one has to live with the times. Though at the time when the Alter Rebbe said it, everybody was puzzled what it meant. Usually living with the times meant exceeding and accepting modernity and following modern norms, as people were always challenged. Yidden were always challenged. Why don't you live with the times already? Why don't you catch up? Why are you so old-fashioned? So when Alter Rebbe said that, everybody was very puzzled until the Middle Rebbe explained that Leben mit der Zeit means to live with the parsha of the week. Asher calls a movement that from all of the above is understood. That Parsha Shoftim has a specific connection and association with the month of El, as the Maimer will explain, by first saying what's the theme and what's the idea of Shoftim. The mitzvah that you shall give place and appoint judges and officers. This is a communal mitzvah. Some mitzvahs are mitzvahs that are obligatory on the individual. The individual person has to put on film. An individual person has to return, let's say, a lost object if he finds it. An individual person has to keep Shabbos. But when it comes to the appointment of judges is something that the community has to appoint. They should appoint Sanhedrin, they should judge the people a righteous judgment. This means this mitzvah is applicable only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash was there such an obligation. On the times of the Beis Hamikdash itself, it was throughout all your gates, meaning b'chol ir, in every city, b'chol pelach, every state or area, whatever, b'chol shevet, and also every tribe. As we know, the shvatim, each one had a different section of Eretz Yisrael. So in every Eretz Yisrael section, the section belonging to Naphtali, the section belonging to Zvulun, the section belonging to God, that had to have like a general Sanhedrin appointed for it as well. We call Malcolm, despite the fact that we find how prevalent it was and how it's applicable to the entire community, still in all, it had a limitation. So it was only in Eretz Yisrael, not outside of Eretz Yisrael. So the limitations are only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, and even in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, this mitzvah aseh was only in Eretz Yisrael. Yet, though nowadays, in the time of Golus, the Sanhedrin ceased, and there's no more halacha of appointing Sanhedrin the way it was in Eretz Yisrael. Mit kol machen still no yesh negamat was managolas in the shoftim titnul chaberuch nisakaponim. They're still now in the time of exile. The idea of appointing judges and officers, at least spiritually. The Rebbe says at least spiritually because there were certain times where Jewish courts were allowed to have the independence. The government gave them the independence, even outside of Eretz Yisrael, even though they were in Golos, to be able to practice the full gamut or almost the entire gamut of Jewish law for their own selves. But anyway, Beruchnius, that's for sure, in every time, in every place, in every place, you have this idea of the spiritual idea of shoftim and v'shoitrim, even though we may not have physical Sanhedrin able to be appointed these days. That's why it says, if it's a communal mitzvah, so it should have said lachem, to you, to the community. Why does it say lecha in the singular? Just like we say, the Medrash explains it, not lekechem. Why does Hashem speak in singular to tell it that it's speaking to every single individual? So the same thing where it says you individually, in the singular, should appoint judges and officers, that this mitzvah is applicable to every single person, regardless of their location, regardless of a time, it's even outside of Eretz Yisrael, even in the time of exile. In the Medrash, it's brought down on this pasuk of shoftim v'shoitrim titnul chol שעריך. It says a very interesting thing. Mashal Melech. This is a metaphor for a king. He had a lot of children. He loved the youngest more than all of his other children. Similarly, he had many, many possessions. He had an orchard that he loved it more than any of his other possessions, any of his other land holdings, etc. Amar HaMelech, so the king said, I am going to give the matter, the king said, I'm going to give that item that I love to the one that I love. In other words, the king said, I'm going to give the orchard, that's my favorite, to my favorite son, my youngest. So to Hashem said, I love the Yidden, that the Yidden are a youth, and I love them. The youth is similar to what we said, that the king loved his youngest son. The same thing, Yidden are considered young, a youth. And it also says, Hashem oyev mishpat, that Hashem loves judgment and justice. And I will give that which I love, which is justice and judgment, to the Yidden because I love them. And here the Medrash adds another part that the Rebbe is going to question, that seemingly goes beyond the mashal that we spoke about before. And in this merit, that the Yidden will have mishpat, and I will make my Shekhinah rest and dwell upon them, the Goy alone, and I will redeem them. So the Rebbe asks on this final addition of the Medrash to the Mashal in the Nimshal, the L'chura, seemingly, Ma'wa Kirshur Vashayich is the Beis and Yonim Shal Mishpat Vashras Hashchina Vage'ula Zelazah. What's the connection and association of both the ideas of the Mishpat, and through Mishpat, because the Yidden have Mishpat, that's why they're going to have Ashras Hashchina, the Shechina is going to dwell amongst them, and that's why they're going to have the Geula. What's the connection between those two? He explains the connection of Mishpat and the Yidden. He had a favorite thing, he gave it to his favorite people. Doesn't explain what it has to do with Ashras Hashchina, doesn't explain what it has to do with Geula. This will be understood by prefacing, where it says in the explanation of the Sifsei Kohen on the Torah, Muva by the Torah al Seder. This is also brought down in the Maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek in the Eira Torah on the Seder. The Eira Torah, the Tzemach Tzedek, often in his Mamorim, will bring from different Mefarshim and Psukim. This is very common in the Eira Torah. So he brings this Pirush in his Maimer. Al pasuk shoftim v'shoftim tin l'chav kol sha'arecha, the Shach says on that pasuk, the b'tevis sha'arecha yeshnam beis pirushim. When it says your gates, there are two explanations. What is the gates referring to again? In the spiritual and b'derech haremes v'adrush. Aleph, one explanation is shezeu haramachivar. It's referring to the 248 limbs and organs of a person. Those are called the gates. That's one explanation. And then another one, which is more common, that we've heard of many times, it's referring to the 7 gates that's in a person. That, if you remember, we mentioned this yesterday in Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah, top of the next page. The Haim, what are the 7 gates of a person? The Beis Naim, 2 eyes, Beis Naim, the 2 ears, Shnei Nechira, after 2 nostrils, V'apeh, and the mouth. Zayin Sharim Elu, and from these 7 gates, whatever we like internalize or receive via these 7 gates, they come in to the other explanation of gates, like the first explanation of gates, to the 248 limbs, because what we see and what we hear and etc., they influence the rest of our body. Like the Chazal say, Ayin Royev, Ayin Shemas, etc., etc. We mentioned this in yesterday's Maimer, if I remember correctly, also in other words, the eyes and so on, all these things influence what's going to be with the rest of our body. So therefore, these 2 explanations, that the gates are referring either to these the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the mouth, or it's referring to all the limbs, are really interconnected, because the 7 gates influence all the 248. So now the Rebbe takes these 7 gates and encapsulates them, that really if you want to minimize them, they really fall into a category of 4. The Dalet Dvarim Elu, and these 4 aspects. What are the 4 aspects? Einayim, eyes, Aznayim, ears, Af, the mouth, Af, the nose, V'peh, the mouth. The number 4 is very significant according to Kabbalah and Chassidus. And Keneged Dalet, Oisis the Shem Havai, these correspond to the 4 letters of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Einayim v'Aznayim and Chochma Bina. Eyes and the ears are Chochma and Bina. As we know, that Chochma is the level of Re'iyah, seeing. The level of seeing godliness is just like we have that type of insight that's not yet broken down intellectually. So it's like a vision of something, whereas ears and hearing has to do with the concept of understanding. As we know, Shema Yisrael doesn't just mean hear with our ears, but understand. So Bina is the level having to do with ears. Af keneged zoi, keneged teferes, close has erampin. The nose corresponds either to Zeirampin in general, to the Shisha Midas, or it corresponds to Teferes, which Teferes being in the center of Zeirampin, it's in the center line, it is Koilanit Ches de Gvura. It's considered the sphere that embodies and includes all the 6 other spheres. I don't remember if I saw this somewhere, I hope I'm not mistaken, but the nose is also like a line, in a way like a letter Vav, that comes down from the top to the bottom. So it's just like the Vav of Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's just like the 6 midas that are coming down from the intellect into midas and therefore into action. So again, I'm not sure if that's the connection between the nose and Tiferes or the 6 midas. Malchus Dibur, the mouth, that's a level of Spheres of Malchus, the level of speech. As we say every Erev Shabbos by Mincha, Peh is the level of Malchus, because we know throughout Chassidus, Malchus has to do with speech, because B'dvar Melech Shilton, that the king rules through his speech. He doesn't have to actually do something, he tells and he commands, and through that, the action is done. So therefore, these 4 things that are the gates, that's considered your gates, are corresponding to Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Isa b'Sefer Yetzirah, the Zayin Sha'arim Elu Hem Kfulis, that's brought down Sefer Yetzirah, that these 7 gates are doubled. we mentioned this in passing in the previous mimer. Here it elaborates more about this. We mentioned also that there are 7 letters in the Aleph base that the Sefer Yetzirah says are doubled letters, meaning they have dogish and rafui. There is the hard and soft sound. The ones that we're familiar with that has hard and soft is Beis Vev, Taf Sof, Kaf Chof, Pei Fei. But there's also the letters of Gimel and Daled and Reish also have that. So these 7 doubles is actually a term that the Alter Rebbe uses in Tanya when he introduces us to the Midas. He says there's Shalosh Imais, which is also a term taken from Sefer Yetzirah, and Sheva Kfulos, and there's 7 doubles. And the Midas, the Alter Rebbe refers to, are doubles. Now the Alter Rebbe in Tanya doesn't explain why the Midas are called doubles. Here we're going to see what the idea is. Why are Midas the level of doubles, similar to the idea of the 7 gates over here? So he says, why are these gates doubled? First of all, these 7 gates are doubled because all these different things that we just now said about the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, that they correspond to the different levels of Yudke Vavke, the different spheres, but particularly in the Midos, it's doubled because there is the Nefesh HaLekis's version of Midas, for example, and the Nefesh HaBahamis' version of the Midas. So that's doubled. Not only is it doubled because you have the Nefesh HaLekis and the Nefesh HaBahamis, but even in the Nefesh HaLekis itself, there is a doubling. Nefesh HaLekis Gufam, the godly soul itself, so Gamkin Kfulos, there's also doubled. How come it's also doubled? Hainu sheyeshnam zayin she'ar mitzad midas hachesed v'hispashtus u'mitzad midas hagvura v'atzimtzum. In the Nefesh HaLekis itself, there's the 7 gates, these different levels of Yudke Vavke, that are in a chesed type of way, meaning they're very expansive, they are they don't limit themselves. And then there's the Midas Hagvur Vatzimtzum. You have these very same Midas, but they are constricted and constrained, and that's the idea of severity. That's the idea that we find in the Aleph base. There's hard letters and there's soft letters. The hard letters indicates severity, strength, and Rafui, weak and soft, indicates chesed. The fact that we have it in the letters of the Aleph base, these are both from the side of Kedusha. Like we said, they're both in Nefesh HaLekis. Where do we see that in Kedusha we have both Gevura and Chesed, Dagish and Rafui? El Shadot Beis Kam B'Kedusha. These are 2 lines of Kedusha. Al Derech Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, similar to Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai in B'Kava Gevura, Beis Hillel in B'Kava Chesed. Beis Shammai is in the line of Gevura, even though they're holy, and Beis Hillel is in the line of Chesed. V'Shneim B'Kedusha, both of them are in holiness. And how do we know that they're both in holiness? No one is wrong over here. In the Mishnah, Mishnayos Eidius enumerates those places where the halachas are like Beis Shammai, which means that Gevura per se, Beis Shammai's approach per se, is a valid approach in Kedusha. So just like we find that there is this in the Kfulis in general, Valderach, the Gam Hazayin Sharem Shem Kfulis B'Nefesh HaLekis Gufa, B'Chesed Gevura, similarly the 7 gates, that they are doubled in Nefesh HaLekis itself, they have their Chesed approach and their Gevura approach. From these 7 gates come down to all the 248 limbs, like we mentioned earlier.